Thank you, Carrie, and thanks to all of you for being with us for this next edition of the Future of Engineering Roundtable. We are excited to share the new design build study report with you and kind of dig in. We shared it at the fall conference a few weeks ago, but at a very high level. And so we're excited to have this great panel with us to dig into what it really means. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors of the ACEC Research Institute who make all of this research possible, and a special shout out to the DPC group who helped fund this study in particular. So thank you to our donors for their continued support. We do have a great panel this week. In fact, this group was all together in person last week at the DBIA conference in Las Vegas. I won't tell you about anything that happened in Vegas because you know the rule, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but we are here to share with you some great stuff. And to kick it off, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin McMahon, who is going to introduce the panel and get us started, and then Keith will jump in with the highlights of the study, and then we'll have some great panel discussion. So Kevin, I'll let you do the introductions and then kick it over to Keith.
Yeah, thank you, Daphne. Hi, I'm Kevin McMahon, former engineering leader and design build aficionado. I will be your moderator today regarding today's webinar on our more detailed deep dive on our ACEC Research Institute's design build study. Joe Bates, my colleague from ACEC Research Institute, will field questions from the audience, as Carrie mentioned. Let me introduce the panel. First, we have Keith Molenaar. Keith is the principal investigator for the study. We worked very closely with him. He is the Dean of the College of Engineering and Applied Sciences, as well as Professor of Construction Engineering and Management at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's the primary author of more than 150 technical reports. He also has done much related work for numerous DOTs and participated on technical review committees for many significant projects. So Keith is very, very experienced in our industry and also particularly in design build. Next, we have Cecil Clemens, who is a proud graduate of civil engineering from Texas A&M. Cecil is our client representative on the panel, and she recently was promoted to Dallas District Engineer overseeing construction, operation, and maintenance for the 7-county Dallas District. Most recently, she has managed over $7 billion in projects, including $5 billion in design build. Over the last several years, she has won numerous awards for outstanding services in the state of Texas in her various roles at Texas DOT. Cecil, thank you very much for joining us. Also, we have Greg Geddes. He is the Director of Design Services for Hensel Phelps, who is a leading integrated project delivery firm in the world. Greg has been a leader in well over 100 design build projects in many industries. Last week, he received the Design Build Institute's Brunelleschi Lifetime Achievement Award for his significant achievements in leadership innovation and the advancement of design build project delivery services. Welcome, Greg. And finally, we have Greg Kelly. Greg is the CEO of STV, which is a leading nationally recognized firm with over 100 years in business. STV specializes in both transportation and social infrastructure. And prior to being the CEO of STV, Greg has experience as a practicing engineer and has also served in all facets of our business, including working for an owner and leading a construction firm and multiple engineering firms. He's been active in design build projects for multiple decades. So our first order of business, we're going to turn it over to Keith, who is going to go through some highlights of the design build study, and then our panel will field some questions from myself and the audience. Keith.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate your participation and look forward to your questions. I'll just give you a little background here before I share my screen and go over some highlights. As Kevin said, I've been doing work in the design build industry for over 25 years now, and been part of multiple studies. Most of the studies have looked at design build performance in terms of cost and schedule, cost certainty, speed of delivery, and overwhelmingly, we've seen design build outperform other delivery methods. And I think you'll see that's part of why we're seeing so much growth in design build and have over the past 20 years. But this study has really been intriguing to me. It's highlighted some things that I haven't understood before, and I don't think have ever been published before. And the real reason for that is because of the ACEC's community's willingness to open up and talk about some of the challenges with design build, and also share with us profitability, risk, and other things that really haven't been studied. And so there were quite a few things that surprised me in this project, and I think give us some opportunities for improvement in the industry. And that's what I wanted to highlight today. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And just to let you know, here, this study is available, and at the end, I'll have a QR code where you can download it if you haven't. And in the 8 to 10 minutes, I'm going to go over the highlights. I really will just hit the highlights. So there's a lot of depth in the study, and I encourage you to download it and take a look. This will give you a pretty good introduction and should allow for a real good discussion. So again, what were we trying to do here in this particular study? We were looking at firm challenges. So specifically for engineers, for designers, what are the challenges for design build? And we hope that will provide recommendations that are useful to the firms, but also to owners who really lead the projects and write the contracts and come up with the risk distribution. The project really is one of the more comprehensive ones I've worked on. And again, I want to thank you. I'm sure many of you helped us with these 155 design firm responses that we got. Again, very large sample size, and we were able to confidently get some results here. But so we started with a firm survey to kind of understand the entire spectrum of the industry. From there, we looked at 105 projects. Here we expanded a little bit. The Design Build Institute of America helped us out to collect projects as well. So started with the firm survey, then we went into design build project studies from all different sectors. And then finally, to wrap things up and really try and understand the causes behind some of the correlations we saw in the firm survey and the project study, we looked at 16 case studies of the best and worst performing projects. And Joe Bates was also part of that, and really learned a lot. A rich set of recommendations came out of that. So we're confident with that 3-step approach that we really have some solid findings that you can rely on. So, why now? Why are we taking a look at these challenges and trying to make the recommendations now? Well, as I said, design build's been growing quickly. The ACEC firms told us that over the past 5 years, over 80% of the firms have experienced growth. And that was both in terms of number of projects and dollar volume. So it's here to stay, it's growing, and the firms are taking part in it. What really came out to us, and I'm not sure we intended this, but you're going to see some results that really relate to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, because some of the challenge we're seeing really turned out to be on these large infrastructure mega projects. And that really relates to where the country's investing and moving the infrastructure forward and looking at these very large jobs. So you'll see here at the end, we really have recommendations that we think design firms and owners must address as we move forward, and they really relate to risk transfer and project harmony. So let me just break that down a little bit. This is not something that I expected. When the ACEC firms shared with us a little bit in profitability, we learned that over 1/3 of them experienced poor or close to poor profitability in the last 5 years. And so, again, you can look more into the report. This is detailed in there, but if you look at this graph, what you'll see is the top part on the right or when we asked about profitability, we had over a third of the projects of the firms were experiencing poor profitability. Not something we'd expected. A lot of the studies that I've worked on before have, again, focused on the speed of delivery and the cost savings and cost certainty for owners, but really not gotten into there. Financial success, a little better, but still, more than you'd like to see, because it only takes one of the projects when they're very large to wipe out all of your profits for an entire year. And then 25% of the firms really weren't feeling satisfied with the process. So, on the positive, over half, were, but we really want to focus on where can we improve in those 25% of the firms. And so, again, you kind of see a tale of two extremes here. We have firms that are having very good experience and firms that are having very poor experience. And so, this study really looks to improve on those areas where we were having poor performance. And that really relates to rate of claims, disputes, arbitration, and litigation. And so when we really dug into that to look at these poor performing firms and projects, it really led to show us that the larger projects, these mega projects, and so this graph to the right is a summary of what we're calling project harmony. So everywhere from claims through disputes and litigation, where those showed up. And so if you look at the graph, the lighter red is our overall population of the projects, so the whole 104 projects. And then the next graph down, the 43 projects are the large projects, and those are the over $100 million projects. And what you're seeing is more claims, more disputes, more litigation on these larger projects. And that is troubling as we work into really large investments that are coming out with our Infrastructure Act. So we dug further into that. And again, the infrastructure, the horizontal projects, and the large projects were really where we were struggling. The smaller projects, a lot of success. The projects with repeat business, with the owners using the same design build teams again, and design build teams working together on multiple projects, were really performing well. But when we looked at those large projects, we were starting to see a real imbalance of risk transfer, teams being asked to work together that had never worked together before, and a lack of harmony. So let me just wrap up with 2 slides on recommendations. And again, these are detailed in the report and really do come from more of the case studies, those best and worst performing case studies that helped us understand those correlations I just showed you. So owners really need to be encouraged to embrace contract language that fairly allocates risks and be active members of the design build team. So not just managing through the contract, but really being part of the team and working closely with the design and construction projects. From our analysis of the large projects, we really question, when we're getting into multi-$100 million projects and multi-billion-dollar projects, is that serving the public well? Is that serving the industry well? If possible, can we look at splitting that up to have teams that have worked together more and potential for more harmony? So that's one recommendation. Something that came across strongly for owners is you really have to have training and have to have design build delivery programs. It's different than design bid build or CM at risk. It takes a unique set of skills. I'm would encourage DBIA has certification of design build or other training programs, but owners really need to look at the unique needs and understanding of best practices of design build, and then having unique programs or really expertise on their side. Looking at avoiding the transference of inequitable risks. So on these large mega projects, we're talking about railroads, utilities, other things that are really third-party risks throughout all projects that are difficult for the design build teams to manage. So owners just needing to avoid that, and not just using design build as a vehicle to move all risks to the design build team. The last two I'll end up with here really comes to the perception that some, even public sector and private sector owners have, that you can't really have discussions with the teams, but that's really what the industry wants: open forums around risk and insurance. And that can, be through draft RFPs, that can be through multiple areas. And I know CSUN can expand on this a little bit, what owners can do, but really not just thinking it all has to be managed through the language and you can't have discussions. And then finally, truly embracing the use of best value procurement. So what do we mean here? Design build is procured before the design is done. So the selection is based on some combination of qualifications, technical proposal, and price. And I have other studies that would show you when price is weighted too high, there's no way that you can select a project based on qualifications or technical proposals. And so owners really need to embrace that best value and weight heavily the qualifications and technical proposals of best value, or we end up with just a low bid design build project, which is not the intent and really does create a lack of harmony and risk transfer. So finally, then the last slide here, just to talk a little bit about recommendations for the firms, really trying to build long-term relationships. That's where we see the best success, when you can have repeat business with multiple, could be multiple partners, but just working together on multiple projects shows better results. And then having a strong risk review, really knowing the contract and looking through the risks before you sign up for something. Those are the key themes. So again, these long-term partnerships, I think Greg can talk a little bit about this, multiple designers over multiple years, really helpful. Both Gregs can talk a little bit about this. Engaging in rigorous contract reviews, either legal or with your experts on your team, really understanding those contracts. And then, working early with owners to set expectations. The best projects we see is when the design build teams can be part of designing the values and designing the outcomes of the project, not just answering again through a contract. And then last, really understanding the full insurance coverage that's needed. I don't have a slide here, but there's some good sections in the report that really talk about all the different types of insurance that are available. And this is where, again, when we get into the mega projects, we really need to be have open forums, and both sides need to understand, what are the different types of insurance available and what is it really costing everybody in the end, and trying to work together as a team to come up with the best insurance solutions. We saw that over and over again. So thanks for giving me a few minutes to highlight the report. It's easy to download. Please, you can use this QR code or just simply search ACEC Design Build Study and you'll find it. You can register and download the report. So at that point, Kevin, I think I'll leave this up for just a moment and then I'll stop sharing so that people can see the panelists, but I'll turn it back over to you here, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Keith. I'd like to start with the panel questions and start with just a quick validation, Keith, of what I heard you say, that you were surprised with the tale of two extremes, and then go to Greg Kelly and then Greg Dudez and close with CSUN on, were you folks surprised by the disparity in performance among mega jobs and smaller jobs under 100 million? And then following up at the end with CSUN's description of for owners, not only TxDOT, but other owners that she talks to, were they surprised and what are they doing about it? So Keith, can you just briefly just highlight your level of surprise at that finding that the study came up with?
Yeah, I will. I finished a large study about 4 years ago for the FHWA that again showed from a FHWA perspective, so Federal Highway Administration perspective, much earlier cost certainty, faster intensity on projects, and overall from an owner's perspective, a real ability to keep cost growth down. So when we got a chance though to kind of look under the hood, if you will, at what was going on within the design build teams on these projects, it was really surprising to me that there was so much risk of litigation and disharmony within the projects, and it was definitely tied to scale. So in our 100+ projects, and you saw in that quick graph, it really was tied to scale of project, and so that was a surprise to me. Yeah,
Thanks for that validation of that point. Greg Kelly, can you address that? And then Greg Gudez, can you follow up?
Yeah, happy to. And Kevin, to you and Keith and the ACEC Research Institute, great job pulling this report together. I think you've moved us from anecdote and sense of what's happening to a really kind of a data-infused look back at how design build has gone, and so we can collectively, as a profession and as an industry, move this to a better place. Because I think the takeaway, Kevin, is 50% are winners and 50% are losers. And I guess if you're going to Las Vegas, that might be okay, but I think for kind of running a business, it's not necessarily going to be productive. So I think we're really at a good point now with what I would see, and I'm going to focus primarily on the infrastructure side of design, build, delivery. We've probably got a good 20 to 25 years of experience here in the U.S. That the work of the Research Institute under Keith has really done a good job to encapsulate. So I think it's a great moment in time for us to take that data forward and try to improve upon it. But to your question, Kevin, was I surprised? The short answer is no. And that's because we participated in the study here at STB, and we have our own kind of experience, and full disclosure, we had some winners and some losers along the way, and it has been a challenge. But I think the report has done a very good job capturing some of the things directionally we should be doing about risk transfer and partnering and whatnot that can make all of us have more successful outcomes.
Thanks. How about you, Greg?
Yeah, I was a bit surprised at the report. It was very enlightening as to where the issues that we need to take a look at and address. Again, it is the tale of two extremes. And what was pretty evident to me was that the lack of understanding of the impact of the risk transfer, as well as an educated and informed team, probably handicapped the larger projects. And that really surprised me, because these are larger projects. The risk is higher, and you would have thought that the risk would have been better analyzed and mitigated, but that didn't seem to be the case. So it sort of suggested that these teams came together for the project, but may not necessarily have had the working experience together to understand what the challenges were and how they'd be overcome. So in that sense, I don't think the challenges are insurmountable. It's going to require a better understanding of risk and the transfer of risk, and that includes the engineers at the bottom of the food chain understanding what the ask is in the agreement with the design builder, and make sure the design builder communicates those risks down to everybody on the team and allows them to weigh in to mitigate those risks. If they come in blind, they're going to get hit, and that's where the problem starts. Also, the importance of the harmony of the team. When you have a high performance team that understands each other's roles and responsibilities, and an owner that's integrated and provides the vision, you get to that high performance team. And I think the ones that were successful demonstrated the high performance teams, and the ones that were not successful probably were dysfunctional in their team structure.
Greg, thanks. Susan, you've been involved in over $5 billion of design build already, and I know TxDOT's been a leader in pushing out major projects in design build. Were you and your colleagues at TxDOT surprised by this, and what's your sense of your other fellow DOT colleagues across the country and their level of surprise, and what's the reaction going to be from the owner community to try to address this?
Yeah, I think we're definitely a little surprised, but I think as both Greg said, you've got winning and losing projects, right? And the owner feels that as well. When there's struggles on the project, the owner is going to feel that, and in our industry, the traveling public as well, because the projects probably are slowing down and things like that. So I think we were a little bit surprised. But also, one thing to realize is even in Texas, I know we've been doing design build for a very long time, but actually our design build legislation only began in 2011, if you can believe that, in Texas. We've been doing design build under comprehensive develop agreements prior to 2011. It started in 2001. So when we got that legislation, I think there was, we quickly jumped into design build, if you will, and tried to execute as many as we were legislatively allowed to. And I think, as Greg mentioned, I think a lot of people jumped in, maybe not completely understanding those risks. And from an owner standpoint, we thought it was very easy to transfer that risk, and you know, we could kind of wash our hands of it. And so I think we have learned with each project that it's not as easy as it sounds just to punt over those risks, that sometimes the owner is probably the better entity to manage some of those risks. And so just a few examples: right away. If we can buy right away for our projects ahead of time, that's our number one priority, because at the end of the day, if the property owner doesn't agree, it's going to go through our attorney general's office, if you will. And so some of the larger utility risks, if we can advance some of those utility relocations, third-party utilities are a challenge for everybody, and getting them to react is challenging. And so we try to advance that during the procurement timeline. And so I think as we've evolved in the design build industry, we have understood that those risks are challenging. Some of those risks are challenged. And so we're trying to adopt that, or advance and change our risk makeup, so that maybe we're not transferring as much risk on future projects.
Well, that would be great news for our design industry, I'll tell you that. So thanks for that answer, Season. Let me turn my next question to Greg Kelly. Start off. Greg, you've overseen many design build projects as either an executive in charge or senior leader, overseeing multiple projects at once. You know, one of the recommendations that Keith outlined is that design firms, along with other project partners, mainly constructors and subs, should strive to engage with the owner in risk transfer decisions early in the project development process. Across the country, in the breadth of design build projects that you're involved in, is this feasible with most of the owners, or is it scattered in the different approaches to get our firms involved early on with the owner's rules about procurement and such?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, a really important question that you've asked. It's definitely feasible to engage with owners, but as Season was just talking about, you know, every owner's at there are different levels of maturity in their experience with design build. I think Season would agree with that as an owner, and so it's kind of recognized when you get in and speak with them about risk transfer. It's really important to recognize where they're starting from and what their experience has been. You know, I've seen over the last 20 years, owners get into design build right away, as Season was describing, perhaps without the bandwidth or the expertise, and a bad experience, and they'll run the other way. And all of a sudden, design build is no good. You know, that's not necessarily the right outcome either. You know, it's important as we get in there and talk to owners and engineers, the professional services part of our industry that we all represent here at ACEC. You know, we have those upstream relationships with clients. That's part of our business success on an ongoing basis. And the clients value our opinion. It's important we get in there and talk to them about some of the risks that are out there. And I think this report that the Research Institute completed is just a great conversation piece, Kevin, to go talk to clients and say, this is surveyed. It's not a onesie or a twosie. It's looked at a broad range of projects, different project types, different geographies, as Keith was talking about. And we could use this report to go out and talk with clients to help them prepare better for this delivery method. So I think it's absolutely feasible. And I think the report that's been produced is kind of the launching pad to make that happen.
Great, Greg, thank you. Greg Geddes, Season mentioned, I think from the infrastructure point of view, a lot of great risks that I think our owners would be better qualified to address, and then her agency and her in particular seem to be in the cutting edge of that. So that was right away, utilities, hazmat, railroad activities. You're mainly on the vertical side. What risks do you feel that could be addressed by the vertical owners? Because a little bit more of that we mentioned was infrastructure related. So what do you see that you would like the owners on the vertical projects to take over as a responsibility?
Well, again, the biggest risk that we see on the vertical is whether the ask is can be reconciled with the offers. Is the scope and the budgets aligned so that we can actually achieve what the owner is looking for? So that's number one. Is there alignment? Also, number two, do we understand what the owner's vision for the project is and what their desired outcomes are? If we all are on the same page as what the vision and the desired outcomes are, then we can put our proposals together to better react to that. Also, I think one of the best practices, and it's been alluded to here, is to put out that draft of the RFP in the qualifications phase to get the feedback from the marketplace as to whether or not A, the scope and the budget are aligned, B, are there unacceptable risk transfers, C, what are the challenges that are been put into the project by the owner. That gives the design builders the opportunity to better understand the ask, and it gives the owners a better opportunity to respond to the marketplace as to what's going to work and what's not. You don't want to go through this process only to find out that you can't negotiate the contract with the winner. So you might as well eliminate that right up front and make sure that the terms are agreeable to all teams and that they clearly understand what the risk transfers are and what the scope of the work is. And then they can determine the best strategies to meet those challenges.
Great, Greg. Thank you very much. Keith, I wanted to get back to you and ask you, you were knee deep in the firm responses and the case studies. What did you observe were the prominent themes or attributes that you observed from the projects that the teams that performed well in projects? And what were the attributes or some common themes among the teams that had the worst performing projects?
Thanks, Kevin. Again, I'm in a great spot as a researcher to get to observe so many projects and so many teams. The biggest trend I saw was how early the teams are formed. So in the vertical projects, that was before schematic design, early, and not just the lead contractor and constructor and lead designer, but are your key subcontractors and trades involved that early? So in buildings, steel, HVAC, depending on what's going on. And that's, similar in the horizontal projects as well. How early are the team members together, and then have they worked together before? So where we saw, again, the successes, it was where the designers really understood what their counterparts needed for pricing in the beginning, and then the contractors really understood the iterative nature of the design process, that you just can't treat an engineer like a commodity. It's different than you can't just put double the crew size like you can on a guardrail. The design process is iterative, and you really have to understand those cultures. And so, the real trends there were early team formation, and then really good knowledge of the projects. The last I would say is first time, right? Not doing the education or jumping into design build without that education or that experience. And so when we saw teams like that and owners like that not taking the time to get the training or learning on that project, we would frequently see difficulties.
Great, Keith. Thanks. Joe, I'm going to ask you, do we have any questions from the audience at this point?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions that have come in, Kevin. Keith mentioned early on in his initial presentation about fair risk transfer. And I know a few of the panelists have talked about lessons learned in terms of transferring risk. But one of the questions from the audience is, what is fair when we talk about fair risk transfer? And I'd love to hear the panelists' thoughts on that.
That's a great question, Joe. Why don't we just go around the horn, and we'll start with CSUN as a client, and we'll go to Greg, and Keith.
Yeah, to me, as you're talking about risk, the first question is who's better to manage that risk. And so as we look at transferring risk, every single one of those, that's what the question you need to be asking. So in my mind, the fair is who's the better entity to manage that risk, and then write the contract accordingly.
Okay. Greg, it does.
Well, in the horizontal sector, as you've heard, there are some things like the right of ways, the utilities, all those kinds of things. Is the owner the better one to own those risks, or is it better to transfer those risks? I think that's a good hard conversation. In the vertical market, especially what we're seeing today, what about things like escalation? Who should own that risk? If it's put on the design builder and they can't control it, there's going to be a lot of contingency built into that. That's going to challenge the ability to fully scope the project on the owner's side. So there needs to be a good conversation about how you manage those risks and who owns those risks and how they will be addressed as the project moves forward. I think another risk that I think was evident in the poorer performing projects is the cost. And how do you price the cost when you're in schematic or early in the design? Is this a hard cost or is it a conceptual cost? And so the ability of the estimators to conceptually estimate and plug the holes that aren't evident in the documents is critical to making sure that the right numbers are put there. And when there is misalignment on the team or there's lack of communication, a lot of those things get missed. And so it's very important that there is an open, robust conversation between the designers and the conceptual estimators to make sure that the right quantities are being priced. It's hard in the first week of the project to determine how much rebar is in the concrete until the design is baked further down the road. So that's an critical element, is to make sure that the pricing is appropriate for the risk.
Okay, great. What's your response to this complicated question, Greg Kelly?
Yeah, and there's multiple levels to this, Kevin, and just I would agree with everything that Greg and Cecil just responded to as well. You know, I think it's important to have that conversation up front about what's the objectives of the owner. It's the owner's project, and what are they trying to achieve? Obviously, they want speed, they want value, you know, for money, and they want the quality to be there. And each of those has its own set of risks that need to be determined. So I'll just pick up on one of them that Greg spoke about on the value side. What's the cost of building that asset out, whether it's a building or a pipeline or whatever it might be, and based on, you know, 2%, 5% design, right? And it's a design, as Greg was saying, is an iterative process. And so it's really important between the designer and the contractor to have real clarity around that. And that could be written in the four corners of a contract or a teaming agreement. But it's also important to have that understanding with an owner. And, you know, there's different models that are beginning to evolve right now, like progressive design build, which begin to address some of the risks that Keith and the Research Institute report has identified. So I think there's got to be a bit of a correction and enhanced communication with the owners in terms of allocating risk. I was reading a report by S&P. It was done around infrastructure projects in North America, and I think it was primarily in Canada. And there was an interesting statistic in there, Kevin. This goes to the risk side of things. 95% of the time, projects are awarded to the lowest bid. And Greg was noting that earlier. But only 40% of the time are they going to the highest technically rated firms. So there's just this massive disconnect there between, if you're an owner and you're spending, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars to develop an asset, and you think this team is the most qualified to do it, but you don't get them because somebody else had a lower price. That seems a little perverse, doesn't it? And so I think it goes to the point of, you know, stepping back, saying, what does the owner want? What are they trying to achieve? They want that quality piece taken care of. So engaging in those discussions, and that's in those discussions, as Greg was talking about, is if you have an honest, kind of mature conversation about it, you can allocate the risks appropriately. Cost being one of them, you know, utility, right away, everything Cecil was talking about.
Awesome. And Keith Molenaar, you've got a bunch of students in your engineering programs that are either going to be working for engineering firms or working for owners. How would you engage the discussion with them, and what is fair?
Great context for that, Kevin. I appreciate it. I'm going to give you a kind of a philosophical answer and then give you some examples. The risks transfer, there's always a shared risk. The owner shares some portion of it, the design builder shares some portion of it. You know, when we traditionally look at design bid build, we don't have to talk about it. We put it down on paper, the contractor knows what they're bidding, and it's real clear. I think risks are inequitably transferred when it's only the lawyers who put them in a contract and they're not discussed. These risks have to be talked about. In a design build approach, there's so much design left to be done. There's so much discovery left to be done when you bring a team together. The conversation has to be there. So I think the risks are being inequitably transferred when my students go into a project that the owner's not talking to the design builder, that they're not both sharing their examples. So a couple of concrete examples I've studied afterwards that have ended up in claims. So I won't tell the projects, but you know, an owner doesn't see boulders under the soil as a risk because they know that if you choose the right piece of equipment, you're not going to run into any delays due to unforeseen conditions. So they assume that a very large boring machine is going to be used or a very large drilling machine is going to be used, but the contractor shows up with something smaller and says, that's not something I can own. Same thing, another project on a large set of locks that again, the owner says there's no risk there. If you show up with the right equipment, the contractor can't procure that equipment. If those things have been discussed, you know, if the contractor and the design builder have that dialogue, then it's not inequitable. But if it's just written into the contract, or we're fighting about what our assumptions are without talking about it, then it's going to end up in inequitable risk transfer. So to me, it's less about the risks and more about the understanding the conversation that has to happen between the design builder and the owner to equitably agree upon who owns the risk to what point.
Great answer, Keith. Everybody's talking about collaboration between the parties, impacting so many items in design build. Hey, Joe, that was a great question. Do you have another?
Yeah, we got quite a few questions coming in, and that one question spurred quite a few others. I have two questions that are asking about the same thing, and that is risk sharing. We talked about inequitable risk transfer, but do any of the panelists have experience with risk sharing? How did that work? Was it successful, etc.?
Great question. Let's give CSUN a break from going first, and we'll start with you, Greg Kelly.
Yeah, you know, in terms of risk sharing, I think it's good to get incentives aligned on it anytime you're building a team. And Kevin, that goes to your point about collaboration. But one thing I would discourage the design professionals from doing is taking quantity risk. We're not skilled at that, and the contractors are. You know, they understand, you know, how their supply chains work, you know, how to buy material, and there's just there can be a lot of variability there. And we've seen in the past where contractor partners will want to allocate some of that risk to the engineer, and I would strongly discourage that. Where I would encourage risk sharing is in what we're good at. Like you shouldn't take on something that you're not proficient at. And one of the things we're good at is finding innovative ways to help the team achieve its objectives. I mean, a hypothetical example, Kevin, would be, you know, let's say it's a highway scheme for a client like CSUN. You know, if we could come up, let's say the bridging documents have, you know, 8 maintenance protection of traffic schemes laid out. And each one of those schemes has a cost associated because they're scheduled and whatnot. And perhaps you can come up with something that can cut that in half. There's an opportunity to share risk, and perhaps there's, you know, we're aligning incentives, and perhaps some of that can accrue to the engineering firm. So the engineering firm is motivated to say, how can I cut schedule in the design development process in preparation of the bid? That's the kind of alignment I would look for. Do not take risk in areas we're not skilled at. Take it in areas where we can add value to the team, which ultimately adds value to the client.
Greg, it does. Greg Kelly, very, very much appreciative of that advice. Greg, it does. What say you about this issue?
Well, I agree with what Greg just said, and I'll also add that it's more than just the risk of who's going to take it and own it. And I think those best able to manage the risk should be the ones that own it. But when I also talk about risk sharing, it's also letting the rest of the team know what my challenges are and how the team can help me overcome them. So for example, I'm going to give you a quick story. I did a project that when I went around the room and I asked everybody at the table, what's your biggest risk? And the general superintendent says to me, my biggest risk is community relations. And I'm thinking, how can this be? And what it was that it was a precast pile foundation on the building surrounded by residential on 3 sides, and pounding those precast piles into the ground was a high risk for just maintaining the sanity of the community. By the time we got around the table, we had a mat slab foundation that eliminated the pile driving and eliminated all the penetrations in the foundation in the water table. It eliminated them because the team identified the risks as a team and then came up with a solution that mitigated the risk. That took 10 months off the schedule. That changed from the precast piles to the mat slab, and that allowed the owner, because it was stipulated sum, to better invest in the building and put money in where it's better spent, like the lobby or the mechanical systems, rather than just in the ground. And so identifying what the challenges are for the team, and as a team coming up with the strategies to mitigate the risk, leads to that harmony that is lacking on so many of these projects. And it builds that team cohesion that allows the projects to be successful.
Yeah, Greg.
Kevin, I just jump back on to Greg's comment there. That's just an excellent example where, you know, somebody's articulating early on what the risk is. For the engineer, there's also risk. There's risk of continually redesigning. We've seen this on projects, Kevin, where, you know, you put together a scope of work. Here's what we're going to do. And as the construction folks, if they don't come in early, or if they change them out a lot from the contracting side of the partnership, you get different ideas. Well, let's go with steel versus concrete. You know, can we do a slurry wall, you know, versus piles? You know, what the design solution is, and you can re-engineer this. So early on, one of the things we've identified as a risk, like we're going to design this once because we know schedule is important. So we don't have the time to continue to value engineer it. So again, from an engineering standpoint, I would encourage our colleagues on the phone to be thinking in those terms too. We have risk too if we're delivering on a lump sum, and we want, just like a contractor, we want to do it once.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Cecil, a lot of us don't get the owner's perspective as much as we should. So as an owner, how do you differentiate between, you know, what the guys have talked about is acceptable risk sharing versus what you articulated before about, you know, you're in a better condition to take on some of these risks due to your ability as an owner to control them better. How do you differentiate between those two concepts of risk?
To me, it's getting industry feedback. We very quickly that, you know, buying right away, it's more about resource allocation. Well, we can dedicate the same number of resources that a design builder could. So why can't we take on that risk? Utilities, when you get third parties involved, that's not a risk that you can transfer over. And we got that feedback from the industry that, hey, you're no more successful than we are at trying to get that utility to respond. Why are you giving it to us? Why is that not a more appropriate risk transfer for you to accept, especially as you're not only dealing with utilities on design build projects, you're dealing with them on design bid build projects as well. So railroads, one of our #1 challenges, a design builder can't push the railroad any harder than we can, if you will. And so why not own that risk? And so as far as risk sharing, we do a lot of that now, where we try to give the design builder an appropriate amount of time to resolve some of these risks. And if a third party, we just cannot get that risk resolved in that appropriate amount of time, then TxDOT's now taken over that schedule delay, and we will compensate the design builder for an unresponsive utility if if we get to that point. But you've also got to keep the design build in design build, if you will. And so if there's an opportunity to redesign around one of those utilities, rather than allow it to dictate the schedule, we still want to incentivize the design builder to be thinking that process. So it's not just an automatic, this utility won't respond to us, so the owner's now taking on all the schedule delays. It's first, you've got 120 days to try to resolve this with the utility company or come up with a design around. After that 120 days, then the owner's then taking on that risk. And so a lot of our risk sharing is schedule based, if you will. So if we can't make progress on whatever that risk is, eventually the owner TxDOT will compensate the design builder for any of those schedule delays.
Okay, thanks. I want to turn to questioning around about relationships and collaboration and partnerships. And then we'll ask Joe for a question from the audience. Keith highlighted, and like a little bit more color, Keith, from you on the value of partnerships. So I want to ask you about that, and then our panelists about how do you go about creating partnerships? How do you evaluate them? How do you change a few team members? And where is it appropriate to do that? Because a lot of the folks out there in the audience are new to this design build game and would like some advice from the experts. So Keith, what did you find in the study about the value of partnerships relative to success?
So the case studies made some things apparent. Let me speak a little bit more broadly and then turn it over to my colleagues here. Early on training, working together in teams to, again, as understand how each other's business practices work. I just saw the Design Build Institute of America's Design Build Awards, and I was surprised at how many certified design builders some of the winning projects had. And that turned out to be because they would go through training together as part of the team building exercise, owner and team, the partnering charters, the working together in big rooms, just a lot of it's just time together. Now that, if this is your first project together, that's got to be a lot more intense. If it's, multiple projects that you've worked on, then it can probably be a little bit less intense, but you have to remember there's always new team members. And for that last thing I'll say that we did find on this study and others, succession planning, because some of your team members will be rolling off just due to the nature of timing. I think that's a really key element as well, so that the leadership has a succession plan. And then, yeah, I'll leave it at that and let some of my colleagues answer here.
Okay, Greg, can you just how you folks at Hensel Phelps view partnerships? How do you evaluate them, and what part of risk and go no go is the partnership approach?
Well, it's incredibly important. I think that every research and every experience, every research I've reviewed and every experiences I've had, the importance of the team cannot be underestimated. And so my number one rule when I'm doing design build is choose your partners wisely. Choose them for the right reason. Are they educated? Do they understand how to integrate and work in that collaborative environment? Do they know how to express the risks and come up with the strategies to overcome the risk? The second experience of a design build team is always better than the first experience, because they've learned of how to integrate and how to work together. With that said, not all team members are appropriate, and sometimes you've got to relieve them from the project in order to maintain the project harmony. You don't want to get there. So I always say pre-qualify the companies and qualify the individuals that are going to be working on the project to make sure you have the right chemistry and characteristics of the team. From a go, no-go perspective, there's a lot of things that we look at. One is, can we put the right team together to satisfy the owner's needs? If we can't put the right team together, both externally and internally, we're probably not going to pursue the project. Is the owner an owner of choice? Are they clear and well communicating to the potential proposers, or are they going to lock up and not engage in the process? Because it is their project and we need them to engage in 100% way. If this is a rebid, we're not looking at it. The owner's probably looking for a low price and not a high performance team. And so we're not interested in competing on low price or rebidding work. Market conditions, are they, can we get the labor and the trades that we need to be successful, or is the market going to preclude that? So there's a lot to look at, but it all comes down to building the right team. And if we have the right team, then we're good to go. Wrong team, it's a no-go.
Great, Greg. Thanks. How about you, Greg Kelly? I know you're a big team guy and participate a lot in evaluation of teams. Can you give us some of your experiences?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And Greg, really comprehensive response. I mean, I think you checked all the different boxes we had to look at. Kevin, the only thing I would add is I would encourage design firms to recognize the market we're in right now. This is moving up and to the right. There's a lot of work out there. If it doesn't check those boxes Greg was talking about, it's okay to say no. In fact, it's good to say no. There's a lot of experience where you have the euphoria of winning a job, but when you get to the end, it's bloody hard and you may not have that much money left in your pocket. It may cost you. We're coming into a place in the market right now with all the IIJ funding that was talked about earlier, where if it's not this opportunity, if it doesn't check all those critical boxes Greg mentioned, walk away. Don't fall in love with the job. Be disciplined. But the other thing I want to add in partnerships, Kevin, is this is from our own experience. Partnerships have better outcomes. So look for partnerships. The one-offs, you may get lucky on one, but you may lose it all on the second one if it's a one-off. So I think I would really encourage you to get aligned with partners that have the same sort of approach and commitment that and share your values and your integrity to deliver a project.
Awesome, great advice. And one of the correlations between mega projects and one-offs is that there's more one-offs on mega projects than any other project, and hence the disconnect. Season, you're a very progressive individual and at a progressive agency. Where is TxDOT right now in the recognition of the value of partnerships, and what are you trying to do with that increased knowledge that you guys have gained over the last 10 years?
Yeah, no, the partnerships, for us, those partnerships have already been formed as we hire a design builder, if you will, but we want to be part of the team as well. And so, one, we encourage our team, to focus on outcomes. Don't nitpick on certain details. What are we ultimately trying to achieve? And then on each one of these design build projects, we have executive partnering once a month, where the owner or the joint venture teams, the design builder, brings their executive level leadership in. We bring our executive level leadership in and have those conversations just to make sure that our teams are focusing on the outcomes rather than getting hung up in the minutia, if you will. In addition, a lot of times as we bring those higher level resources in, they have the relationships that they can make phone calls of folks that aren't, if the utility's not being responsive. All right, we're going to make some phone calls and ensure they are being responsive, because at the end of the day, the design builder plus the owner, we want a good project. We want it within the contract means, but we can do a lot to help the project move along, if you will. And so my hope is the owner realizes they're part of the team as well and do their part with that partnership.
Excellent words. Joe, we have time for one more question from the audience. Give it your best shot.
Sure, Kevin. We've got a lot of great questions today. Thank you to everybody who submitted them. We'll try to follow up with those who we weren't able to ask their questions live. But I've got one last question. It's really more directed towards Keith. In terms of that data from the project, did you see any difference in the number of claims and or the profitability when the type of project is taken into account? So transportation versus water versus whatever else.
Yeah, great question. With 100 projects, when we started to parse that narrowly, we couldn't get something statistically significant. So I can share with you in general. Again, we definitely had it statistically significant on size. So we did see more claims with size, but more infrastructure projects were tending towards higher rates. Water, wastewater, where they were performance-based, very outcome-based, and then they would move more towards a progressive design build. We were starting to see trends with fewer. We just didn't have enough data, though, to parse it that finely. I think I would actually go back towards some of the other team aspects and risk transfer aspects that we talked about that seem to be true across all project types versus the characteristics of the projects themselves.
Thanks so much, Keith, and thank you to everyone for participating in this panel. I think we're at the end of our time. I feel like we could go on for another hour. It's a fascinating topic and a fascinating panel with a lot of insights and experience. Thank you all. And Kerry, are you out there for a few closing words?
I'm trying to find my mouse to undo everything. Well, thank you everybody for joining and attending. I hope you got a lot out of today. As mentioned in the early introductions, we do have this recorded that we will post to our YouTube page later this afternoon if you wanted to share it for your colleagues that were not able to attend. Thank you again to our panelists for your time today. It was a great session. Thank you again to our donors who made this roundtable happen. And we do have a roundtable coming up next week that Joe will be participating in for our economic forecast. We invite you all to join us as well. And with that, thank you for your time, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.